This was something new to us, a bombing in broad daylight, a resort country club. It was shocking.
A violent explosion.
He suffered a traumatic injury from the shrapnel and the shock wave. His death was instantaneous.
A dark mystery with multiple suspects.
Emotions flare. She has a temper. She's mad at Gary, and it's alleged that she might have a weapon.
Gary had lots of enemies. There were millions of dollars owed to different people.
He said, I'm going to kill Gary Triano because he ripped me off.
He may have had dealings with the mob, and he ends up killed in a car bombing. Those two things could go together.
The truth will be revealed.
This is like the dogs in the chase. It's a trail that we can't not follow.
That was the smoking gun to show that they had committed this murder.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. In the Arizona desert lies the city of Tucson, a pleasure seeker's oasis blessed with beautiful landscapes and year-long sunshine.
Tucson does have its upper-class areas that are designed around recreation and relaxation, the country clubs, the plush golf courses. Years ago, real estate was booming. They were building resort destinations. You had celebrities coming here just to vacation because they wanted to stay at those kind of places. That type of luxury lifestyle was really growing in Tucson.
But on November 1st, 1996, the upscale world of the city's rich and famous is brutally shattered.
911, what are you reporting?
There's a car explosion in the parking lot.
Is it on fire?
Yes, it is.
911, what is the emergency?
La Paloma Country Club. Bomb just blew up in a car.
We have an explosion in the country club parking lot. I'm
Okay, that's a vehicle?
I'm not sure there's a fire and we need paramedics.
The 911 calls came in about 5:40 p.m.
There'd been an explosion. There was one person deceased. I could see even before I walked up that the car was completely destroyed.
The roof has been torn off of it. All the doors were blown open from the shock wave. The glass obviously is shattered out of the vehicle. The windshield had flown south over 100, 150 feet and had landed in the swimming pool of the country club.
It was something we hadn't seen before. Tucson, like any community, has some awful murders that go on, but we'd never seen a bombing in broad daylight, a resort country club. This was something new to us. It was shocking.
The victim is local business tycoon, 52-year-old Gary Triano.
Gary Triano, he started out as just a working businessman trying to make a living, and he went from that to being a multimillionaire land developer.
Gary was really kind of an amazing person. He was a high flyer in the sense of he had this ability to raise large amounts of money for different investment ventures.
He had 5 children, 2 from his first marriage, 2 from his second marriage, and then he also had a 5th child with his ex-girlfriend, Robin. Gary Triano was larger than life. He was so charismatic. I knew him personally, and always a gentleman, and always the life of the party.
Tasked with investigating the murder of Gary Triano are detectives James Gamber and Keith St. John. They start by surveying the crime scene looking for evidence.
Mr. Triano was still very intact. He suffered a lot of blast injury to his right hand, his right arm, and to the right side of his face. And a lot of it was thermal injury, where it's burning from the heat of the explosion. And there was a lot of traumatic injury from the shrapnel and the shock waves. His death was instantaneous. We relied on our bomb technicians to tell us where the explosion took place. They pointed to the right front passenger seat, said the device was sitting right here. It was very easy to determine from his injuries that he had been essentially leaning over towards the front passenger seat and had been picking something up when the device detonated. The bomb techs also discovered some burnt material, and it was from a gym bag.
Detectives determined the killer likely put the bomb in the gym bag and then placed it on the front seat of Gary's vehicle.
The bomb techs amazed me again because they actually recovered the radio crystal from the remote control device. And they find parts of the servo in the blast scene. So now we know it's a remotely detonated device.
We learned that the radio waves had to be line of sight. That gave us the best clue that the killer was in the parking lot when the device went off.
This was someone sitting there watching, and they pushed a button and made it go off.
The mindset of somebody that could sit there and just calmly switch a button on a remote control and blow him up, that's pretty perverse. It's devoid of any sort of human feeling when you can just calmly switch a button and snuff out another human life.
That a person would sit and wait for the precise time to set the explosion off indicated it was somebody that was stalking, someone that had planned the murder. It just wasn't random.
Time of death in a lot of homicide investigations is a real open question.
In this case, the explosion was so powerful that it stopped Gary Triano's watch at the precise time of the explosion.
And it stopped at exactly 5:38 p.m.
To catch the killer, detectives will need to unravel the last 24 hours of Gary Triano's life.
Gary had been golfing with a friend that afternoon, and they golfed 2:30 to 4:30-ish. And after they'd gotten some drinks, a bite to eat in the country club, his golf partner had indicated that it was right around 5:30 that the two of them walked to the parking lot. They chatted, and the golf partner then walked away from Gary's car. And it was just shortly after that that the explosion occurred.
As investigators interview the employees of the country club, they learn something unsettling.
4:15, someone had called the clubhouse asking about Gary Triano.
And the caller's not identified. So this unidentified person says, "Is he playing golf today?" And the pro shop says, "Yes."
And, given the fact that a little over an hour later, he's in the parking lot and the car explodes, clearly we wanted to know who was making that phone call.
Could it have been the killer? Absolutely.
That's something we have to look into. But we couldn't trace the phone call back to its source. After all the different interviews, I didn't see that we had any concrete evidence that anybody saw the killer in the parking lot that night. So we knew we were in for hard work.
Looking for information that could point them in the direction of the killer, detectives speak with Gary's girlfriend, Donna.
Gary's current girlfriend, Donna, was at the scene when I got there and I interviewed her. And obviously she is upset. This is a horrifying incident. Donna and his family members, they want to know what happened, who did this, and I don't have any answers.
Donna tells detectives that while Gary was an optimistic man, the downturn in the economy hit him hard.
From 92 to 93, Gary Triano went from $1.7 million to $107,000. A 93% loss in his income.
He wasn't able to meet his financial obligations. I mean, at the country club, he was behind on his dues, but he always had that belief the next deal is going to work.
But given the amount of debt that he had accumulated in his recent past, that plus the added pressure of who Gary Triano was and his status in the community, there was a lot of stress during that time for Gary.
Gary's financial downfall started to wear on him.
Gary had become a little bit paranoid. He thought he was being followed. And so he became a little wary.
It was some tough times there. I was told by a friend of Gary Triano's that a couple of months prior to the murder that he had told her that he knew somebody was following him, and it was real evident. And he was scared. He didn't know why.
But Donna says she has a good idea who this stalker is.
She told law enforcement, hey, you might want to be looking at the former girlfriend because there was some animosity there.
Robin is a young lady who was the ex-girlfriend. We learned that she had a baby with Gary. The baby wasn't very old at the time of the murder.
Robin reportedly was angry because she had Gary's child and there was no wedding in the future. Donna was able to provide us with a recording of a phone message that was left for Gary. And it has Robin saying, "You're going to pay. Someday you're going to pay."
So when a lover is spurned, there's feelings of rejection there. There's heightened emotion. This increases the odds for very conflictual emotions and perhaps aggressive behavior.
With suspicion swirling around Gary's ex-girlfriend, Robin, detectives dig deeper and learn that a year before the murder, police responded to a domestic violence call at their home.
There's an incident between the two of them where she throws a vase at Gary. And it's alleged that she might have a weapon. In any murder investigation, you obviously look at people that are close to the victim. Who is mad at him? Who is angered by him? So when you look at Robin, she has a temper. She's mad at Gary. And after the birth of the child, emotions flare. Jealousy, anger. Could this anger carry over into a murder?
Believing Gary Triano's former girlfriend, Robin, may have wanted to kill him, detectives track her down at her home. They confront Robin about her angry encounters with Gary.
She says it wasn't a happy separation. There were some angry phone calls and there was maybe plates broken and things like that.
There was animosity when she first became pregnant. However, after paternity was decided and Gary knew that he was the father, their relationship had gotten better.
Robin tells detectives that she has moved on since Gary and is now married.
I spoke to her current husband who says, yeah, she has a temper. But her grudges didn't last long. When she's mad, it's going to happen right here, right now, and it's going to be over right here and right now.
Detectives ask Robin about her activities on the day Gary was killed. They learn she was home taking care of her child.
Robin's point of view is he's a guy who has always made a comeback. And he is a good father to the child. So she has no benefit in eliminating him. Any future income that might come from him would be gone.
And when detectives look into Robin's alibi on the day of the murder, it checks out, and she's eliminated as a suspect.
So the evidence doesn't take us to Robin, and her personal history doesn't support her being involved in a long-term plot to kill Gary.
Searching for new leads, detectives look deeper into Gary's personal life and turn their focus to another ex, his former wife, Pam Phillips. They track Pam down at her home in Aspen, Colorado.
Pam was very attractive. She knew how to socialize. She was an up-and-comer financially. She was working in the commercial real estate market.
Pam tells detectives she met Gary when he was married, but they fell madly in love. Gary divorced his wife and married Pam in 1986, less than a year after they first met.
They got married in San Diego on a boat. I believe Donald Trump was at the wedding and people like major actors. So it was, champagne flowing, spare no expense type of relationship.
It's been reported that the wedding ring that Pamela got from Gary was valued at $250,000, $250,000.
Pam tells detectives they were very happy. They went on to have 2 children together. But 8 years later, when Gary lost their money, he changed. His moods were up and down, and the relationship suffered.
In 1994, after Gary Triano lost his money, his marriage collapsed as well. There was a lot of tension there, and it was a very contentious divorce.
Pam talked about bringing $2 million of her own money into the relationship when they got married, and she found out that that was gone.
There were a lot of fights about custody issues with respect to who was going to get the children, Gary's financial responsibility.
So Pam Phillips moves to Aspen and takes the children with her to start her new life.
But when you have that kind of acrimonious divorce between Gary and Pam Phillips, it's something that makes you a little concerned about Pam's potential involvement. But, nothing is making sense yet.
Detectives ask Pam about her whereabouts on the day Gary was violently killed.
Pam told us that she was in Aspen that Friday night. And we talked to people that were with her. So we were comfortable that she was in Aspen at the time of the murder.
Having ruled out Pam as a suspect, detectives turned back to the crime scene, looking for new leads.
ATF was reconstructing the bomb from the parts gathered out of the parking lot. And there were a couple things that were interesting about the bomb reconstruction.
The battery supplies were way more energy than it really needed to detonate the device.
That was an indication that perhaps the person was not familiar with making bombs. They were a novice at making bombs. The nature of the bomb itself, 18-inch pipe bomb stuffed with a pound of gunpowder rigged up to this remote control, was not sophisticated, and it was really more indicative of someone that may have learned this from people that were making bombs in the 70s or the 80s. And gave an indication that maybe this was an older individual.
Being able to narrow down a suspect's age can be very important in terms of narrowing the haystack that you're looking for that needle in. That automatically helps point police in the right direction.
Armed with new information about the killer, detectives take another look at Gary Triano's close friends and associates.
Detectives are looking into various financial motives. Gary had lots of business partners, and he had enemies. Former business partners were suing him. I mean, there were millions of dollars, at least alleged, that Gary owed to different people. Could one of them have been responsible for Gary's death? Are any of these people saying, I'm giving up on ever getting my money back, so I'm going to exact some sort of retribution and kill Gary Triano?
Believing real estate mogul Gary Triano could have been murdered by someone he owed money to, detectives shift their focus to his business associates.
People talked about a man by the name of Neil McNeese. McNeese hated Gary Triano.
McNeese is an actual billionaire who lived here in Tucson. His family had some uranium mines in northern Arizona, and they made a lot of money. Gary had borrowed some money from this guy McNeese. He'd borrowed $80,000, and as collateral, Gary had given McNeese what he claimed to be a $250,000 diamond ring that belonged to the ex-wife, Pam. But according to McNeese, the diamond was fake. It was a cubic zirconium. It was worth, at best, a few $1,000s. Could McNeese have been responsible for the murder because of the $80,000 that Gary hadn't paid him back?
But it turns out the information is a dead end.
McNeese was suspicious, but that doesn't really get you anywhere because there was no evidence at that point in time McNeese had anything to do with the murder at all.
Having exhausted yet another lead, the investigation into Gary Triano's murder stalls.
As an investigator, you want to do the best you can for both the case and especially the family who's just lost a loved one. They're looking to you for answers. And then when you add Gary Triano was well known in the community, there was a lot of stress during that time. The difficult part of this case was just the sheer number of potential suspects that had to be looked at, the number of leads that had to be gone through, and basically triage. You had to look at them and say, well, is this something that really could fit? Not only could it fit, but is there evidence to back up the theory? No, so you moved on to the next one.
Searching for new leads, detectives dig deeper into Gary Triano's business connections, looking for someone angry enough to want to kill him in such a ruthless way.
Gary was really good at getting people to invest money in his projects. Some of the people weren't the kind of people that most of us would seek money from. I mean, there were mobsters back on the East Coast that Gary was indebted to. And so our thought was this mob related? Because you just don't see people getting killed in car bombings in Tucson.
This could be a very promising lead. In this case, when it's revealed that the victim may have had dealings with the mob and he ends up killed in a car bombing, I mean, those two things, conventionally speaking, you would expect to go together.
Detectives learn one of the people Gary Triano owes money to is Gary Fears, a gangster from Florida.
Gary Triano was marketing building a casino on a small island that belonged to the Republic of China. And Gary purported that he had permission from the Chinese government to run a casino there.
Gary Fears fronted a lot of money toward that endeavor. But the endeavor fell through. China wasn't going to allow the gaming.
A lot of people felt that Gary had misrepresented the approval from the People's Republic of China. They only had local officials' approval to do this. Gary Fears is angry. He lost tens of thousands of dollars in total.
He was somebody that had to be looked at. He was not the nicest guy.
Word on the street, what people told us is that Gary Fears had a shady background, and he was someone to be feared, someone that you should, you put yourself at risk if you crossed him.
Believing Gary Triano may have been killed as retribution for double-crossing Fears, investigators track him down.
Gary Fears is of interest to us, and you have to evaluate the person. Were they capable of it? Did they have the means, motive, and opportunity?
When police question Fears, he admits that he was furious with Gary Triano about being misled over the China deal.
He says, yeah, I lost tens of thousands of dollars. But Gary Fears was suing Gary Triano to get money back from him. And Gary dissolved all his debts by declaring bankruptcy. It's almost an automatic reflex when your business ventures overwhelm your capital is file bankruptcy and absolve your debt. Gary Fears was greatly frustrated by Gary's financial dealing. Maybe his anger over the money, the financial loss, overrode his common sense.
After a business deal gone bad, police believe mobster Gary Fears may have something to do with the brutal killing of Gary Triano. They ask him point blank if he's responsible for Triano's death.
He goes very stone cold and absolute, looked at us and said, I'm not going to kill somebody for several $1,000s.
The mob complicates an investigation because it's a tight-knit group that doesn't make mistakes easily. And also they are going to have no problem lying when it comes to police investigations.
Doubtful Fears is being honest with them. Detectives ask him to take a polygraph test.
Mr. Fears agreed to be polygraphed and was asked, again, point blank in the polygraph, did you kill Gary Triano? Did you cause Gary Triano's death? Mr. Fears passed the polygraph. In addition to the polygraph, Gary Fears provides the alibi that he was at a family wedding, and there's, credible witnesses who can place him at the wedding at the time of the murder.
We talked to as many people as we could. We found no direct link between Gary Fears and the bombing.
9 years pass, and just when it looks like the case will never be solved, detectives get a surprising new lead from police in Aspen, Colorado.
The explosion here in Tucson made national news, and so I received a call from Detective Crowley in Aspen. He talked about his fraud investigation where a person by the name of Ron Young was a suspect. And according to Detective Crowley, he had a connection with Pam Phillips, Gary's ex-wife.
Ron Young apparently had scammed several people in Aspen. Pam was one of the victims.
Detective Jim Crowley says there's something really odd here. Pam Phillips was alleging that Ron defrauded her for tens of thousands of dollars. And she was very vocal about it within the community. But when we as law enforcement approach her and say, hey, we need to include you in our case, along with these other fraud victims, she just never makes herself available. It's almost as if she's distancing herself from law enforcement. It was interesting.
Detective Crowley outlines Ron Young's scam for the investigators.
Ron Young would befriend people and profess he was a professional, somebody who knew finances for small businesses. And he would become involved in that business and then take money from the business.
He's defrauding people under the guise of, you'll end up with more money in the bank if you let me handle your financial matters. And he convinced people to let him do it. And the whole time he's skimming your money, he's taking it and putting it in his pocket.
When Aspen Police go to arrest Ron for fraud, they discover he has fled the state. They track down his van in California. Ron is nowhere to be found, but what they find in the van turns the investigation on its head.
Jim Crowley looks at Ron Young's van and finds Gary Triano's divorce paperwork. There's a list of people who would know Gary Triano. And there's also a map of Tucson.
What they find next raises detective suspicions to the next level.
We find a receipt for a local hotel that puts Ron Young in a hotel that's essentially halfway between where Gary Triano's living and the La Paloma Country Club, where he was killed. He's there for about 18 days in the month of July 1996. So does that coincide with when Gary felt like he was being followed? We are exploring every possibility.
Certainly, we're starting to think, did Ron Young have something to do with Gary Triano's death? Was there some sort of relationship beyond this fraudulent activity between Pam Phillips and Ron Young?
Detectives Gamber and St. John take another look at Pam Phillips and find something that raises a red flag.
Even though the divorce had been finalized for quite some time, Pam continued to carry a $2 million life insurance policy on Gary's life. And that catches your eye.
The life insurance policy pays the money to Gary and Pam's 2 children. Since the children are below the age of 18, the $2 million goes directly to Pam.
So in January of 1997, Pam Phillips gets $2.1 million because of Gary's death.
But it's what detectives learn next that puts the spotlight directly on Pam.
Up till that point in time, Pam had been living in a duplex. Within a few months of getting the money, Pam has moved from that duplex into what I can only describe as a beautiful, beautiful home that she has now purchased with the proceeds from the life insurance policy. That raised some concerns with investigators because the children were the primary beneficiaries, and now this money is being used to buy this really lavish home.
So when you follow the money, Pam has a $2 million reason for Gary to die.
Believing Pam Phillips and Ron Young may have conspired to kill Gary Triano, investigators pay another visit to Pam in Aspen.
When they ask her about Ron Young, there's an audible gulp. Where did that come from kind of reaction from her, which immediately caught our attention.
She maintained that she had hired him to help her business. That's all it was. She claimed that although she didn't want to prosecute, that, he had taken some money from her, and she didn't know where he was.
People lie to the police all the time, and a lot of times it's good to have those lies because if you can prove a lie, that's even more important than a confession. I felt Pam was definitely minimizing her relationship with Ron Young.
Investigators speak to Pam's circle of friends, hoping to uncover the truth about her relationship with Ron.
The nanny that worked for Pam in Aspen, he describes a very intimate, ongoing relationship.
Ron Young would come over for dinner. There'd be candlelight, there'd be wine, and the two of them would disappear to the upstairs bedroom for the night.
So their relationship goes well beyond the scope of what she had described to us.
There's a growing concern about what Pam and Ron Young did. Could they have been responsible for Gary's death? Could one of them have been the bomber? We're pretty sure it's not Pam because, she has an alibi. She was in Aspen at the time. But could Pam have hired Ron Young or got him in some way to commit the murder?
This is like the dogs in the chase. It's a trail that we can't just not follow.
Working the theory that Gary Triano's ex-wife Pam Phillips could be the mastermind behind his brutal murder, detectives focus on finding her missing accomplice, Ron Young.
We're thinking if we could get Ron Young, we might be able to fill in a lot of the blanks that are here, because something is really fishy about what's going on.
There's an arrest warrant for Ron Young, but no one can find him. This guy is gone. He is off the face of the earth.
Detectives turn to a different strategy, hoping to get a lead.
We go to America's Most Wanted and say, would you feature this guy? We want to find him. We have the fraud case, and we have the fact that we think he's directly involved in a homicide in Tucson. So America's Most Wanted ultimately does the TV show, and they feature Ron Young.
Detectives soon get their big break from a caller in Florida.
A caller says, I'm Ron Young's chiropractor. I know him as Kelly Young, but that's definitely the same guy. And he says, he has an appointment with me tomorrow.
Because of this TV show, we know where Ron Young is, we know where to find him, we know where he's going to be at 10 o'clock the next morning. This is a huge break in the case. The Broward County Sheriff's Department sends their fugitive team out to the chiropractors, and sure enough, right on time at the appointment, here comes Ron Young, and he's taken into custody.
Ron Young is arrested on fraud charges, then flown to Arizona to be interrogated by Tucson police.
Ron Young is a con man. He's confident, he's relaxed, he's amiable, he'll talk to you about everything and anything, but he won't ever answer a direct question.
With Ron in their crosshairs, investigators press him for answers.
What's your relationship with Pam Phillips? Do you know Gary Triano? For hours, we sat there and talked to him. He says he knows nothing about Gary's insurance policy. He has never been to Tucson. Just hours and hours of long, roundabout denials.
But while Ron Young doesn't give up any information, his belongings do.
ATF agents search his hotel room, his apartment, and his storage locker. There's a box of stuff. In that box are about 15 microcassettes.
It was a mother lode of information. There were years and years of correspondence between Pam Phillips and Ron Young. And although they don't get specific, that I went out and killed Gary Triano for you, he says things that are more sort of shaded. Like, I did something for you that nobody else would have done in the world. I took care of the problem that you were having.
You sent my money yet? My principal?
I am not going to keep sending you more and more and more money unless I know that you can honor our agreement. I want this definitive now.
Well, I do too.
And I'm going to try to figure out how to get it to you. I want to know that we're capping it at 4.
From the recordings, investigators learned Pam had an arrangement with Ron where she'd pay him $400,000 out of the life insurance money to kill her ex-husband, Gary Triano. But it seems she was late on her payments.
And we have a disagreement.
I am very serious about this.
Well, I tell you, you're going to be very serious when you sit in a women's prison for murder. You're going to be really sad.
I'm going to be back at 4.
No, you're going to be in prison for murder.
That was chilling. When I heard that, that was absolutely chilling.
By keeping audio recordings, it implicates himself, but at the same time, it's a bargaining chip to ensure that if he were to ever go down, he was going to make sure that she went down with him.
That was, in fact, the smoking gun to show that the two of them had committed this murder.
This is incredible. I mean, this is just this side of a confession.
Based on all the evidence, detectives now believe Pam orchestrated Gary Triano's murder.
Pam Phillips stood to gain a lot by having Gary dead. $2 million.
Pam Phillips was coming down to her last few $1,000s. She didn't have any immediate prospects of marrying another millionaire, and she needed to do something. She had this life insurance policy there, and in Ron Young, she found someone that she could manipulate, and she was using him with this sexual relationship. So she was able to convince him, with the promise of payment, into killing her ex-husband.
In this case, is this some kind of an archetype of a black widow who is motivated to maintain relationships for their own monetary gain? I see perhaps Pam as somebody who felt entitled, both in terms of a particular lifestyle, not just finances. And so perhaps she felt that she was owed and deserved more and went after what she thought was rightfully hers.
Prosecutors charge Pam Phillips and Ron Young with the murder of Gary Triano.
When we go to arrest Pam, we find out approximately a week prior to the warrants being issued, she had left the United States. She's gone. Working with different law enforcement agencies, eventually we find out Pam is in Lugano, Switzerland. We have details down to the apartment that she's staying at. We know what car she's driving, who she's dating, and where she has lunch most every day. We have that locked down. But we went to arrest Pam in Switzerland and she wasn't there. That was a huge disappointment. Eventually, through Interpol, she's ultimately found in a hotel in Austria.
We extradite her back to the United States. One of the things we had to do, because the European Union does not have the death penalty, we had to agree that we would not seek the death penalty in her case.
Back in the United States, Pam Phillips refuses to cooperate with law enforcement.
Pam never gave us a statement. I more expected that Ron Young would give us a statement implicating Pam, and he never said a word. Neither one of them would talk against the other. But we have all this evidence about what might have happened here.
Detectives are now able to reconstruct the final 24 hours of Gary Triano's life.
November 1st, 1996, Gary went to lunch with a friend. They had their lunch at 1 in the afternoon. Then Gary proceeded over to the La Paloma Country Club.
2:30 to 4:30, he's out golfing with a friend. during that period of time, when he went to the golf course that afternoon, Ron Young was stalking him. Ron Young had the bomb that would end his life. At 3:30, while Gary's on the golf course, Ron Young walks up to his car. He has the bag that conceals the bomb. Then Ron Young places it on the front passenger seat of Gary's car and walks away. At the end of golfing, around 5:30, Gary pays his bill and he walks out into the parking lot. Then at 5:38, Ron Young flips a switch on the remote control. The device detonates and the car explodes, killing Gary Triano.
The family put up with a lot from us. All our failings, they put up with those. And then finally, I was able to call Gary's oldest daughter. She was the family representative, and I got her on the phone and I was able to tell her, we found the killers.
In October 2008, Ron Young and Pam Phillips are charged with conspiracy and first-degree murder. They're both sentenced to life in prison with no parole.
After Pam Phillips is convicted of killing Gary Triano, she stands up in court, looks at the audience, and in the front row were Gary Triano's family. She looks at them and she says, "I did not do this. I did not kill Gary. I am not responsible. He is the father of my children. I did not do this."
But investigators are convinced they finally brought Gary Triano's killers to justice.
It was important to us to hold accountable the people that we had no doubt committed this murder. This was not a rage killing. This was not a spur-of-the-moment killing. This took lots and lots of planning. So when you think about the fact that Pam's carrying on with her life, she's raising her children, and at the same time for months, she's planning that her ex-husband is going to die. That's cold, that's cruel, and that's what stands out to me. Had Gary lived, he would have been 71. So this family had waited 18 years for some justice to come about.
All homicides are sad. But in this case, I knew the victim, and I knew the persons involved, and how the Triano family was devastated. I don't think there's ever closure. So while they may have closure with the persons responsible are now in prison and will never hurt anybody again, it still doesn't bring Gary back.